Good morning. Probably the greatest difference between the message of the infinite way and any other religious teaching about which we have any knowledge, orthodox, metaphysical, or spiritual, is that in the infinite way we do not believe that any statement of truth, any prayer, any affirmation or denial, any word that is spoken or thought has any power whatsoever, any spiritual power, unless it is uttered out from spiritual consciousness. This means that the infinite way actually says that the prayers that are uttered in churches, except in the rare instance of someone who is in spiritual consciousness, is a waste of time. And it says that all the metaphysical treatments that are given are for the most part a waste of time. That none of the truth you read in the books, that none of the statements of truth you make to each other or to yourself, that none of this is spiritual power. Unless these are uttered from the standpoint of attained spiritual consciousness. That is, unless you are in the spirit when you voice it, write it, think it, declare it, or pray it, or treat. Unless you are in the spirit, your prayer is going, or your treatment is going no higher than the level of your own mind. Now remember this, there is some fruitage from church prayers, and there is some fruitage from mental declarations of truth, but these are from the level of the mind. They have no relationship at all to spiritual demonstration or God power. In other words, no treatment or prayer can rise any higher than the consciousness from which it emanates. And that means that if you, as a human being, in your ordinary three-dimensional consciousness, pray, treat, affirm, deny, you can expect some measure of human demonstration from it, human improvement. But the amount of that fruitage will only be in proportion to your human faith or belief, or your powers of mental concentration. like the 15 people who we learn get healed every year out of the 100,000 that go to Lourdes. Those 15 people are healed because of the intensity of their own faith and emotion. It has nothing to do with God. It's not a spiritual healing. It has to do with the intensity of their own emotion, their own faith, their own belief, their own hope. So it is that much of the metaphysical healing work is accomplished, first of all, by the intensity of the faith and emotion of the practitioner, and secondly, by the hope and faith of the patient. Sometimes patients bring a great deal of hope and faith and confidence. Sometimes that hope, faith, and confidence is in God. Sometimes that hope, faith, and confidence is in the practitioner. Sometimes that hope, faith, and confidence is in the particular approach. In other words, many people have faith in Christian Science, or others have faith in unity, others have faith in the infinite way, and in proportion to their faith, so is it unto them. Others have faith in their particular practitioner, and in proportion to their faith, so is it unto them. But for actual spiritual demonstration, for actual spiritual healing, that is, the expression of God power, that is entirely dependent upon the individual who is the practitioner rising first of all into an atmosphere of spirit, into an actual consciousness of God's presence. Then any word uttered, any thought, any statement made or written is power. It's God power, just expressing itself through the individual who is, at that moment, the practitioner. It is for this reason that for our students, especially those who have been with the works for many years, it is foolish for them to attempt to give a treatment, or even acknowledge a letter which they receive from someone asking for help, until they are sure first that they are in the Spirit. That is why in this January letter it says that you must forget the world and stop trying to help the world or heal the world or be a do-gooder. You must give your entire attention to yourself. May sound selfish, but how could it be selfish when you know that all your efforts are going to fail anyhow, unless you first attain that spirit? Then after that, give yourself to the world, or let God give itself to the world through you. But it is a form of egotism to believe that you or I have power to benefit anyone of ourselves, even of our own understanding of what's in the books. Even if we could memorize every one of the books and everything that's in the books, and all the scriptures besides, it's still egotism to believe that we have such powers. But if you rise into God consciousness, into spiritual awareness, if you attain a measure of realization of God's presence, then it's really unimportant what you say to your student or patient, or what you write to them, or even what you think. Because God's power is there and is doing its work. You may say or write, I will help you. You may say or write, I am with you. You may say or write 12 pages of intense metaphysics. Makes no difference. As long as you're in the spirit, the work will be done. That is why, even though I am so much in this spirit through constant meditations, that I don't attempt to answer my mail until I have first gotten myself into the spirit, and then I rarely answer more than 1 or 2 or 3 letters before I stop and go back in again. And certainly every time I come to a letter that doesn't bring out a flow, I go right back into it. Because any letter that I would write has no more power than a letter that anyone else would write, if it's to come out of my mind. But if I'm first in the spirit, then that power flows, and actually for the healing purpose it wouldn't make any difference if I didn't write the letter. Writing the letter or dictating it is only a concession to patients and students who, if they didn't get an answer, would believe that nothing happened, or their letter wasn't received or wasn't given attention. But actually the work is done when the call registers itself in my consciousness and I'm in the spirit. The two things must come together. Actually, I don't have to receive the message in my mind. In other words, it makes no difference if your letter's delivered to me or lost in the mail. It doesn't make a difference if your cable reaches me or not. The registering in my consciousness takes place when you think to make contact with me. Whether you think to go to the telephone or whether you think to sit down and send a cable or a letter, at that moment, if I am in the spirit, I have received the call. And if I never hear humanly from the letter or cable or telephone call, it will make no difference. However, very few students or patients are prepared to accept that height of unfoldment, and so it is that every cable or telephone call or letter that I receive is answered, and as promptly as I can get to it. Now, do not expect anything of the treatment or of the prayer. Well, don't expect too much of it unless you have first brought yourself into the atmosphere of God, into the atmosphere of your soul, until you feel a warmth within yourself, a gentleness, a presence, a something that assures you that you're in the presence of God. And then you may be assured that regardless of what form your message takes, or your treatment, or your prayer, it will be effective. At that stage, then, it makes no difference if your prayer is intercessory, if it's petition, affirmation, denial, or a complete silence. Because it isn't any of those things that did the work, it was the actual presence that did the work. Those things were only the means of conveying the idea to another, while they believed they had to receive a human assurance. With 3/4 of the world being as interested as it is today in the subject of peace, and certainly there never was a time when there was so much fear of war, and therefore there could never have been a time when there was such an intense desire for peace. Certainly under those circumstances, then, these tens of millions of prayers that are uttered every day, and more especially every Sunday, would be productive of a complete change of consciousness on earth if they were uttered out from the Spirit. But they aren't. And because they are uttered from the mind, even those who voice them aren't hopeful of receiving an answer. I'm sure most of them would be shocked if they woke up the next day and found a whole new consciousness. But that is only because the human mind cannot really grasp the idea of faith. We read of the word faith, and we're told that you must have faith. Well, of course, the world hasn't got faith. And even when it declares that it has, it hasn't. Because faith is of such a nature that wherever it is, fruition is, fruitage. Faith is something more than blind hope. Faith is something more than an anticipation of good. Faith is an actual contact with God, and where there is no actual contact with God, there is no faith. There is only a human hope, but a hope without a reason. Faith only exists where there is spiritual contact, because then faith takes on its real meaning. Faith is a power. But since that is true, you can see that faith isn't something that you generate. Faith is something that takes possession of you. Faith is really the Spirit of God itself felt humanly. Faith is a gift of God. Faith is a quality that transcends anything that the human mind can grasp or understand. Therefore, it is not our concern to develop a faith or declare that we have faith, whether faith in God or faith in infinite way or faith in a practitioner. That's not our function at all. Usually to say it is like to put on a false face. It's declaring something that we aren't and haven't. our one major concern should be to be still until that Spirit of God takes over and we can feel it. When the human mind is asking questions, then you know you haven't it. When the human mind says, well, what do you mean by within? Or what do you mean by faith? You haven't it yet. Or when the human mind says, how do I know? Or when the human mind says, oh, I haven't enough understanding. Oh, I wish I had more understanding. None of that is it. None of that is helpful. There's only one thing helpful, and that is to understand that any activity of the human mind is just a barrier between you and God realization. Any hope that you entertain, any faith you believe you have, all of these are barriers. You have to come to the place where you understand that if I had the faith to move mountains, it would be meaningless. Isn't that what Paul meant when he said that if you had all that faith, it would be nothing if you didn't have love? Because, well, love wouldn't be any more important than faith if it was human love. A human faith is no power. Human love is no power in the spiritual scale. Yes, if you had all the faith, and if you had all the charity so that you gave away your last dollar, and if you had all the hope, it still would avail nothing. All that counts is a refraining from these things, refraining from claiming that I have faith, I have hope, I have understanding, and agree that even if I had, it means nothing spiritually. And then become receptive to whatever it is that is to unfold from within yourself. Each of us is inwardly connected with an infinite storehouse. Just like every tree and bush in this valley is connected with the same soil and the same inner life that flows through the soil. Everything out there in this valley and on these mountains is connected with the same infinite source. But if there is a barrier between the roots and the free flow of that life through the soil, then you're going to have a dead tree, a dead plant. We are in the same relationship in this world as an individual tree out there. We are an individual, visible expression of an invisible life. When we know this and consciously make contact with it, we no longer have a life of our own. It is its life that flows as our experience, and our source being infinite, our demonstration is about as infinite as we can accept, just as it is out there. Now, the human world, while it is at one with this infinite source, it is not consciously so. And that's what separates the world from the spiritual individual, or the individual of spiritual awareness, because the entire secret of life is bound up in the one word, consciousness. If I am consciously aware of this infinite fountain, source, storehouse, and I consciously draw on it by realizing my oneness with it and letting the flow take place, then that is the way it is unto me. But if in the human life I think of myself as this, and then think that my life is dependent on my efforts, my physical strength, or my mental powers, or my education, or my understanding, then I am limiting myself to those. The very moment that I begin to acknowledge that he that is within me is greater than he that is in the world, the minute that I begin to acknowledge that he performeth that which is given me to do, the minute I acknowledge that there is a he, in other words, that there is an infinite source, whether we call it he, she, or it, the moment I acknowledge that my life is the product of something greater than my human selfhood, then I have set myself to make contact with it. That's only the first step. If that itself were all there is to it, then many more would be enjoying spiritual fruitage. But there's another step, and that step is the actual contact. And that, of course, makes up the whole message of the infinite way. The infinite way is divided into two parts. At first is the statement which says, I and the Father are one, and all that the Father hath is mine. It says that I exist only as a front for an infinite storehouse which is invisible, and that it is possible for me to be consciously one with the Father, this infinite storehouse, this fountain of good. Then the second part of the message of the infinite way is how to attain that conscious union. So, as far as the message goes, you will find in every article, in every chapter, the statement, in one form or another, that I and the Father are one, and all that the Father hath is mine. And then in all the rest of the articles, or all the rest of the chapters, you'll find that it is taught how to attain this living relationship through studying the correct letter, seeing it with the eyes, hearing it with the ears, meditating upon it, cogitating, contemplating the Word, abiding in the Word, and letting the Word abide in us until eventually there comes an inner stillness when we no longer declare the Word, no longer pray, treat, affirm, but are brought to a state of silence in which we can be receptive and feel its flow. That's the ultimate of the message. Now, when we come to this point, where we consciously know that I and the Father are one, and all the Father hath is mine, all that the Father is flowing into expression as my individual being. Now I know this, and in 1,000 different ways I remind myself of it. Then finally I get to the place where I really believe it. I have a conviction of it, and so now I rest from statements of truth. I rest from thoughts of truth. I just rest in a complete stillness with my ears open. Sooner or later, every student will find that when they get to that place, a moment of complete stillness will take place. It may be, a second in duration. A complete stillness, when just for a second, even the mind is still. That's all that's necessary. Because as this practice is continued, it becomes easier to attain that moment of silence, and those moments of silence prolong themselves into 2 seconds and 10 seconds and 30 seconds. With continued practice, it becomes possible most of the time to settle back into that stillness almost at will, at any given moment of the day or night. And yet, because the mesmerism of the world is what it is, there may be times when it may take a whole hour before it's attained. And that doesn't mean necessarily an hour of just sitting trying to force it. It may mean 1 or 2 or 3 minutes of sitting, waiting, and then getting up and walking around, and then trying it over again, or reading a little bit, and then returning to it. No use trying to take heaven by storm if it doesn't come in a very few minutes. Get up and do something else. Eat something, drink something, read something, walk up and down the room or outside, return to it. Sometimes even it's wise to lie down and take a nap. But eventually it comes, and as I say, it grows in intensity, and eventually, to some extent, it remains all of the time. Regardless of what you're doing in the outer world, there's always a little area of consciousness that's unmoved by the human scene. But the point is this, that when the Spirit of God is upon you, when you're completely relaxed and get that feel of the presence, then anything you do or think is with spiritual power. Then you understand the real meaning of the word faith. Regardless of what truth you know when you sit down to meditate, to treat, to heal, always be sure that you do not consider that your work is complete, your treatment or your prayer, until you have in some way received the assurance of God's presence, the feel. Then eventually you will see why it is that you no longer have faith in anything in the world of effect as pertaining to spiritual power. You'll know that spiritual power is only present when the Spirit of God is present. The Master said, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, and I am ordained to heal the sick." He would never have said, "I am ordained to heal the sick," unless the Spirit of the Lord God were upon him. For none knew better than he that I can of my own self do nothing. It is only when that Spirit is upon me, or when I am in that Spirit, in the conscious awareness of its presence, because consciousness is the secret, you will soon learn by observation that everything within range of your consciousness is taking on the quality of your consciousness. You will soon see that your trees, your flowers, your crops are responding not only to nature, to the amount of rain or fertilizer they get, but they go beyond that and they take on an additional richness because they are embraced in your consciousness. You have embraced them in your consciousness. So it is, you will find that the people who are embraced in your consciousness, whether it's your family, your patients, or your students, they too are taking on a greater degree of harmony in their affairs due to being embraced in your consciousness. Now, this is a wonderful thing because if you start with Jesus Christ and can see that the 12, the 70, the 200 became something more than ordinary human beings, that they went out in the world and by virtue of their consciousness brought others into spiritual awareness, you can see how important it was that the Master embrace 12, 70, or 200 in his consciousness, that they may partake of his consciousness, and that's what's meant by in his name. By virtue of being in the Master's consciousness, they partook of that consciousness, And then they went out, and those who became part of their consciousness partook of their state of consciousness. And so Christianity thrived for nearly 400 years. And wherever these disciples and apostles moved, miracles took place, in prison and out, in lions' dens and out, because they were all included in that Christ consciousness of which Jesus was so well aware, and which operated through the disciples and the apostles for the benefit of others. Eventually, a Peter, a Paul, a John arrives at the realization themselves of this Christhood. And they're no longer dependent on Jesus' attained consciousness, for they have themselves attained. And others who come within range of their consciousness begin to manifest greater harmonies. And then in turn, some of those who are not satisfied merely with the demonstrations of harmony go after the attainment of the consciousness themselves. The first fruitage of an individual's experience on contact with a spiritually illumined person is that greater harmonies begin to come into their experience. But that is only a primary stage. After that, the individual must come into an actual awareness themselves, an actual consciousness themselves of this presence. Now, one person living in the consciousness of God's presence can bring tremendous harmony into the lives of everyone who touches his or her consciousness. But that must only be a first step. That's why the Master said, if I go not away, the Comforter will not come to you. I have seen in my metaphysical career some tremendous healings come to people, tremendous changes of life, from lack to abundance, from disease to health, from unpeace to peace, from inharmony and discord to peace. But unfortunately, I have also witnessed how many of these have not retained it, because they have not made the effort themselves to attain that same consciousness. Now, it isn't easily attained. That is why students give up too soon. The way is straight and narrow. Few there be attain it. Firstly, because the highest price that has to be paid for it is humility, and that the human being has not too much of. Nothing less than a complete humility brings it. And that humility is not just a pious-looking face. It's far more than that. It is an ultimate and actual acknowledgement that my human identity is nothing, whether it's physicality or mentality or intellectuality, that there has to be a complete vacuum into which and through which the Spirit of God can operate. It isn't simple. It isn't quickly achieved. And even when it is achieved, it can be lost. It has to be nurtured. It has to be fed. And always with it, that same humility is the greatest factor in it. The passage in the front of all of our books, spiritual illumination dissolves all material ties, binds us together, means exactly that. We are united with each other, if so be we consciously maintain that union with each other. In the book, which was a class, Metaphysical Notes, you have the theme, my conscious union with God constitutes, or my conscious oneness with God constitutes my oneness with all individual spiritual being and idea. And it is literally true that when this Spirit of God is upon me, I am not only one with God, but I am one with all spiritual creation, human, animal, vegetable, mineral. Therefore I am one with all those who are attuned to me. And whatever degree of upliftment I am or have, they experience. That is why throughout this world students are receiving benefit from my attained state of spiritual consciousness, but that is only for the purpose of revealing to them what the nature of that contact is and can do, so that they also strive to attain this inner conscious contact. Now, the first sign that you attain it is not merely in some measure of harmony that comes to you, but probably more than that, the harmonies that you bring to others. You may still be shy of harmonies in your own life, which is as it should be, because none of us should want to be rid of a problem, ever, until the problem is replaced by consciousness. There's no use of being physically healthy if we're in the state of consciousness that will enable us to get sick again tomorrow. There is no use in the attaining of a certain amount of dollars if we're still in the state of consciousness where we can lack tomorrow. So the first thing that is to be gotten is the attainment of the consciousness, and then letting the health or the supply or the companionship or whatever it may be unfold as an aftermath. The attempt to attain health, supply, companionship, or whatnot will continue to be a barrier to our spiritual demonstration, whereas releasing ourselves from the desire for the attainment of any condition of life, so that we can give ourselves wholeheartedly to attaining the consciousness of the presence, This will eventually result in our attaining this presence, this contact with our source. From then on, we have no demonstration to make, because it flows day by day as it is needed, and often with 12 baskets full left over. But the demonstration of things and conditions is not our work. Our work is the attaining of that inner awareness, that inner stillness and peace, and then let it perform its work. All of our work, beginning with the December letter, carried through into January, February, and March, is going to reveal that to you. Don't expect fruitfulness in the outer experience, except in proportion to the attainment of this inner peace. And even if you have greater demonstration than you believe possible, don't be too happy about it, because it is only a natural consequence of the inner attainment. Never get involved in those things of the outer world. Oh, certainly, enjoy them, use them. That's what they're for. That's what they're for. The Master would never have taught that we are entitled to fulfillment, that it is your Father's good pleasure to give you every good thing in this world, if He hadn't meant for us to have them and enjoy them. But always remember that the source of them is the attainment of the Spirit. Then you won't get trapped into thinking that they of their own selves are something. Now, do not separate yourself from your good by believing that these harmonies that come into your experience or the experience of those around you are other than the fruitage of your attained state of consciousness. Don't make the mistake of orthodoxy in believing that Jesus Christ is a born Son of God, and therefore separate and apart from all other men. But don't make the metaphysical mistake of separating Jesus from Christ and saying, oh, Jesus didn't do it, Christ did. Because you have now gotten yourself into trouble. Many practitioners have ultimately lost their own way by making statements like, oh, well, I had nothing to do with it, you know, God did. So that immediately separated them from God. And as a matter of fact, there never was such a God as they were talking about. The only God in the case was their attained state of consciousness. When you try to separate Christ from Jesus, that's when you get into the class of these stupid people who are writing books about Mrs. Eddy and trying to see her as something other than Christian Science. And thinking, oh, Christian Science may be all right, but Mrs. Eddy is only a woman. You might just as well tear Jesus and Christ apart as tear Mrs. Eddy and Christian Science apart. Because aside from Mrs. Eddy, there is no Christian Science. She is Christian Science. Without her, it never would have been and would not be. So with you. When you are responsible for a healing, for somebody to try to separate it from you, it's doing the same thing. They're trying to set up a God separate and apart from you. Well, had they not found you, where would they have been? Could they have found a God separate and apart from you? No, there wasn't one standing around on the street corner, and there wasn't one sitting in their home. They found their harmony when they found you. For I and the Father are consciously one, and where I am, God is, and where God is, I am, for we are indivisible and inseparable. And if I should say to you, oh, don't thank me, I didn't do it, you should say, well, how is it didn't happen till I found you? How is it didn't happen with my mother or my father or my sister or my brother? Now you know the reason. It is because consciousness is the secret. And when I am conscious, everybody is one with God. But you can't go down to the gas station and get your healing. Difference is in the word consciousness. I am consciously one with God, not by declaring it, but because I believed it first and then set about attaining it. You are consciously, you are one with God. But I'm going to heal anybody. First, you must accept consciously that relationship. Then you must set about attaining it. And then when you attain it and feel that presence, now you are so completely one with God that you can't separate Christ from you. Then if somebody wants to call you Christ Joel or Christ Daisy or Christ Bill, that's perfectly all right. Because it's entirely inseparable and indivisible from your source, and that is what makes blessings flow. The fact that you are consciously one and have the awareness of that presence. Do you see that? Don't tear Jesus and Christ apart. Acknowledge that Christ and Jesus are one, and all that Christ is, Jesus is, because of oneness. Thou seest Jesus, thou seest the Father that sent him. Now remember that that is a universal truth about every one of us in proportion to our attainment of that consciousness of it. I and my Father are one. The Father within you, he doeth the works. Don't separate yourself from that Father by saying, I didn't do it. I had nothing to do with it. Of course you did. You're devoting your whole life to it. You're giving every conscious moment to it. You're giving yourself heart, soul, mind, body, and dollars to it. Then how can you turn around and say, I didn't do it or I had nothing to do with it? When it's your whole life's hope, ambition, and attainment. Do you see that? Then never make the mistake of separating yourself from God. And never believe that when you aren't consciously present with God, that you are anything other than a branch that's cut off. Don't expect spiritual fruitage. See that? But when you are one with the Father, and when you daily bring yourself back to that relationship, then you can expect anything that you can expect of God can be expected of you. If it's raising the dead, it's possible to you in proportion to that oneness with the Spirit. When the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, I am ordained to bring harmony into this world. By virtue of that contact, of that oneness. Do you see that? But don't deny it afterward, because you break your contact. See that? Well, the next of these is going to be Tuesday morning, the final one probably, because I don't know what January will bring forth. I'm going to Maui 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. So whatever plans are for after that, we'll just have to pass by word of mouth.